You want to celebrate capitalism. You want to give it a free rein. You want it to pursue profits. You believe in it. Well, that's what it did. The gift it gives you and the gift it keeps on giving is the center of economics moving to the BRICS. Now, the politics. The BRICS are where the people of this planet live. If you add up all the populations of all the countries that are members or associates in the BRICS, it's way more than half the people on this planet. The population of the United States is 4.5%. If you add the G7, double it. Be generous, maybe 12%. 12% in the G7, 50 to 60%, if not more, in the BRICS.
Richard Wolff often stresses that the growing influence of the BRICS marks a major turning point in global economic history.
The two biggest countries on earth, China and India, are meeting in China, working all this out. Politically, it's over. More and more votes in the United Nations are everybody against the United States. It can't even hold on to its own allies half the time in the G7. Many votes are the whole world versus the United States and Israel, or the United States and one or two other tiny politically, we are already isolated. It reflects the economic foundation beneath it, but it's politically kind of obvious. The United States chose to fight a war against Russia in Ukraine, to punish Russia for invading Ukraine in order to protect its border from the encroachment of NATO.
But the rise of BRICS challenges this dominance in ways Washington can no longer ignore.
Whatever you think of that war, Russia is winning. The United States and the Western Europeans have been losing. That's why the line of where the Russians control is now giving at least a third of Ukraine over to the Russians already. And what happened there was a misunderstanding of the BRICS. Why is that? A political disaster like a lost war? Yeah. Here was the mistake. The Americans thought that they could punish the Russians for invading Ukraine by imposing on them massive sanctions, taking billions of money from them that they had stored in Europe, and refusing to buy the oil and gas, which are crucial exports for the Russian economy.
One of Wolff's key observations is that the BRICS countries represent not just a large share of global population, but also an increasingly significant portion of global GDP.
One mistake was made. They didn't understand the BRICS. Because here's what Russia did. It said, okay, those sanctions would hurt if we had no way to get around them. Okay, you're not buying our oil and gas would really hurt if we can't find anyone else to sell it to. But they found a way to get around the sanctions, which they've done. And they got a way to find new customers for their oil and gas, which they've done. The BRICS did all of that for them, with them. That's the solidarity you get if you're the core new powerhouse of the world economy. Now, finally, the military. And here's the ironic part of all this. The BRICS are a very diverse collection of countries. It's very easy to see that they have different relationships, one versus the other, with the United States.
Their economies are no longer secondary players in a US-led system. They are building their own networks of trade, investment, and technology.
Some of them are still wrapped up in the Western-dominated global economic system that is shrinking, but is still a big, powerful presence. Some of them are Muslim, some of them are Hindu, some of them are neither, some of them are rich, others are quite poor. I mean, there are lots of disagreements, lots of differences, lots of ways that their unity is fragile. It's relatively new. One of the few things that is holding them together is the relentless hostility and enmity of the United States and Western Europe. It's not at all unusual, and most of you know it.
This reduces their dependence on Western markets and institutions. For the US, this means losing leverage it once took for granted.
That people who might otherwise be at each other's throats will become good friends if they have a common enemy. The BRICS have a common enemy. Doesn't have to be. The United States didn't have to become the enemy. Western Europe didn't have to. They've chosen to. They don't like a challenge, especially a successful one, to the role they used to have. But you know, the disunity is also an enormous strength. This is a message from the philosopher Hegel, the unity of opposites. The BRICS are threatened by their disunity, their differences, but they are also blessed by that disunity. And I'm going to tell you why.
With BRICS countries exploring alternatives to the dollar in international trade, the US faces a serious threat to its monetary supremacy.
Their disunity means they're not all relying on one of their number to be the military powerhouse. Yes, China is the richest member, and China will eventually overwhelm the others, if that's how they go, by its very size and its productivity. The only conceivable challenge to that might be India, but already India is doing that. But the disunity among them means they all have armies. You see, the unity of Europe, the European Union, never had that level of difference that they had their armies after World War II. They had it earlier, but after World War II, they made a decision they now deeply regret.
For decades, the dollar's role as the global reserve currency has allowed the US to borrow cheaply, run deficits, and project financial power across the world.
We are in the presence of a historical shift. The United States has been trying now over 10 years to stop it, to contain it, to pivot to Asia. There's 100 ways it's being said. That's not working for these 10 years. China has become regularly more important economically, more important politically, and more important militarily. Army, Air Force, Navy, all of it. And as I said, the BRICS have military power too.
It will also make it harder for Washington to use sanctions as a political weapon.
We have to come face to face with where we are historically, and we would be a lot better off sitting down with the BRICS and working out a way we can all live on this planet, because the only thing left for the West to contemplate as this process unfolds is nuclear war, and then the game is over for everyone. And if you rule that out, if you're smart enough to do that, then the next thing is to sit down. Otherwise, you're going to spend your treasure and lose lots of people's lives in a fruitless effort to stop the historical process.
A central issue Wolff highlights is the question of currency.
The United States would take over the military. So today, the United States has a global military, 700 bases around the world to try to enforce its empire. But the rest of the G7 have no military to speak of. Laughable. No one takes the military seriously. They're not a global force. That's not true in the BRICS. China and India have, and Indonesia and other countries also have. So the irony is their disunity means they won't go the way Europe does, because Europe is now in danger of falling apart because it has no military, and the United States is not willing to play the role anymore. That's why the war in Ukraine is going so badly for the West.
If BRICS nations succeed in creating mechanisms for trade outside the dollar, American influence will weaken.
And I want to call this one trying to control Harvard, because that's what Mr. Trump's behavior is all about. It's him and what he wants and what his government is going to do under his direction versus Harvard University, which I don't have to describe because you all know what that is. And I should make it clear at the beginning that I attended Harvard University. I graduated from Harvard University. I am a Harvard alumnus, and I hope that that does not damage what I'm about to say in both of its purposes and in your minds. So here we go. American universities were, once upon a time, rather separate places. They were places devoted to teaching and to research, and they were maintained for those purposes and those purposes alone. They were organized, like everything else in America, in a rank order of wealth and prestige. At the very top, you had places like Harvard and Yale and Princeton and a whole bunch of places like that. After World War II, the working class of America wanted to have a piece of higher education themselves. Before that, most Americans didn't go beyond high school. And if they did go to college, they were usually the richest amongst us because it was expensive to go to these places, typically in rural areas or away from the center of cities, not always, but most often, where young people could be educated into college and graduate school in a place that focused on that activity. Professors used to come and stay there pretty much for their lifetime, get to know the students, get to work with one another to create a specialized place of learning. After World War II, as I said, this was expanded. All 50 states created the state university system. The University of Michigan, for example, then Michigan State, and then all the little community colleges that Michigan also provides for its citizens, as do most of the other states in this country. But then, particularly after World War II, it became clear to corporate America that a huge number of people were going to higher education. It wasn't something just for the super rich and their children to make sure they got the credential so that they would be rich and be able to take the place of their own parents as the parents aged. No, now it was going to be something for millions of people. Still a minority, but a big one. And so the corporations realized this is a place where lots of young people are going to have their ideas shaped, their ideas about politics, their ideas about economics, their ideas about the capitalist system they live in, and so on. And corporate America decided We want to be able to control what goes on there. They were upset that in some of these schools, sometimes there were people who were critics of capitalism, critics of the inequalities in American society. That's right, they were thinking people, and they were doing what schools are supposed to have them do, namely, do some thinking, and don't always be a cheerleader for what exists. But the corporations were not interested, not in thinking people, and certainly not in critical thinking. They wanted to get rid of those people. Now, you couldn't go to a college and say, I want to get rid of these people. That's not what the college idea was. We were supposed to send people to college to ask critical questions, to think critically, to identify the problems in society and think about solving them. Imagine. Corporations had no interest. So here's what they began to do. They offered the colleges something that colleges were always short of: money. We'll give you a big donation. We will help you hire professors in this area or that area, or build a school of law, or maybe a school of dentistry. Allow you to grow, allow you to bring more students, allow you to hire more professors. But, if you're going to take our money, well, you can't insult us. We don't want to hear about a professor who doesn't like rich people, who doesn't like a system that makes some people billionaires and lots of other people poverty stricken. No, you can't have that as a criticism. So it turns out the colleges had, and this has been true for decades, had to play a complicated game, suck up enough to corporations and rich people and big families to get the money, but don't give them quite what they want, because what they want is to make college a place where no critical thinking goes on. That's a serious problem. It has never been solved. It was never solved at Harvard in the years I went to school there, and it has never been solved in any of the universities, and there are several where I have taught in my career as a professor, which is what I've done most of my life. But we now have in Mr. Trump something worse than that. Now we have the government stepping in with its own ideas. It turns out that universities, who were uncomfortable often in taking the money of rich people, they overcame their discomfort, let me assure you. They took plenty of it. Harvard leading the way, but Yale and Princeton, places I've been at, they take tons of money from corporation and tons of money from rich people. They have campaigns, that's what they call them, to raise money. And they raise money not only in the millions, in the billions. But they're always a little uncomfortable because they know about the strings that are always attached. So they were pleased when the government, again, particularly after World War II, when the government offered to help finance higher education. It provided subsidies to the state universities so they could charge lower tuition than the private Harvards of this country, enabling less wealthy people to go to college. This was a privilege won by working people fighting with their legislators to get the bills passed to allow the government to help fund education. The idea was to lessen the dependence of teachers and students on corporations with their strings. And for a while, it worked. Not perfectly. Politicians were also interested in controlling the universities, particularly when unscrupulous ones among them tried to blame their political adversary for something that went on in a university. Back in the 1950s, we had a scare in this country called McCarthyism. It was when a politician, a senator from Wisconsin named Joe McCarthy, used the government to try to control what went on in schools. Who to hire, who to fire, who to allow to teach, who to would be determining what critical thoughts our delicate students would be exposed to. The excuse then was, we're fighting communism. So all you had to do was say some professor wrote a book that didn't say only horrible things about communism, but maybe a couple of good ones. That guy should be fired. That guy shouldn't teach. That guy is a danger. We got it all the time. There were terrible moments in which a number of colleges, by the way, including Harvard, fired people because they didn't want the hostility of the government looking down on them and maybe cutting off the money.